Unconditional discharge explained. A comprehensive overview introduction, approximately 150,200 words. Welcome back to AI Future Wire News. In today's video, we're diving into an important concept in the criminal justice system, the unconditional discharge. For those who are not familiar, an unconditional discharge is a legal term that might sound complex, but it is quite straightforward when broken down. Today, we'll explain exactly what an unconditional discharge is, how it works, and the implications it has for defendants. An unconditional discharge occurs when a defendant is found guilty of a crime but is not sentenced to any prison time or other forms of punishment. Instead, the court lets them go without any conditions, essentially leaving them with no further obligations. But what does that mean for individuals involved in criminal proceedings? We'll go over the legal jargon, the different types of discharges, and the situations in which an unconditional discharge might be granted. Let's break down this concept step by step, exploring the legal meaning, the process, and why it matters for individuals and society at large. Understanding unconditional discharge, approximately 400,500 words. An unconditional discharge is a sentence that a court can impose when a person is found guilty of an offense, but the judge decides that the person should not face additional punishment. It is one of several options available to judges when sentencing, and it represents the least severe outcome in terms of criminal penalties. The key to understanding an unconditional discharge is realizing that it does not come with a fine, community service, or a prison sentence. In fact, the defendant is essentially free to go after the ruling, and there are no follow-up actions required from them, unless they commit another offense. What is the legal significance? In legal terms, an unconditional discharge indicates that the judge has taken the circumstances into account and has determined that the offense was not serious enough to warrant further punishment. This type of discharge is often given in cases where the defendant's behavior was not intentional, where it's a first offense, or where the defendant shows remorse and a lack of a criminal history. It is important to note that while an unconditional discharge has no immediate consequences, it does still mark a conviction. This means that even though the defendant is free to go, they still have a criminal record. This can impact future employment, travel, and more, though the discharge itself doesn't carry any active conditions. When is unconditional discharge given? An unconditional discharge is typically reserved for low-level offenses and situations where the defendant's actions may not be considered severely harmful. The court may consider factors such as 1. First-time offenders. Individuals with no prior criminal history might be more likely to receive an unconditional discharge. 2. Remorse and rehabilitation. The judge may take into account whether the defendant has shown genuine remorse for their actions and is taking steps to rehabilitate. 3. Mitigating circumstances. Any circumstances that may have contributed to the offense, e.g., personal issues, stress, or coercion, can lead to a more lenient sentence like an unconditional discharge. The process of granting an unconditional discharge, approximately 400,500 words. Now that we understand what an unconditional discharge is, let's explore how it works in practice. When someone is charged with a crime, they go through a legal process that culminates in a court hearing where the judge will decide on a sentence. After a conviction, the judge will assess the severity of the crime, the defendant's history, and other factors before determining the appropriate punishment. If the judge believes that the defendant does not require further intervention, they may opt for an unconditional discharge. This decision typically follows a guilty plea or conviction after trial. In some cases, a pre-sentence report may be provided, which gives insight into the defendant's background and the circumstances surrounding the crime. The process is quite simple. 1. Charge and conviction. The defendant is charged with a crime and convicted by the court. 2. Consideration of factors. The judge reviews mitigating factors such as age, mental state, first-time offense, and remorse. 3. Unconditional discharge decision. If the judge determines that an unconditional discharge is appropriate, the defendant is granted this ruling. 3. There is no immediate punishment beyond the conviction itself. Implications and consequences of an unconditional discharge, approximately 400,500 words. While an unconditional discharge means there are no direct punitive measures imposed, it is important to recognize that there are still some consequences for the individual. Even though the defendant does not face prison time, fines, or probation, the following implications may arise. 1. Criminal record. The discharge will appear on the defendant's criminal record. 1. This may not involve probation or further sentencing, but it still counts as a conviction. 2. Employment challenges. A criminal record can impact a person's ability to gain employment. 2. Employers often conduct background checks, and even though the discharge is not a harsh sentence, the fact of the conviction may still raise concerns. 3. Travel and immigration. In some countries, having a criminal record, regardless of whether a discharge was unconditional, can affect travel and immigration status. 3. Individuals may be barred from entering certain countries or face difficulties securing visas. 4. No additional legal consequences. Unlike a conditional discharge, there are no additional requirements such as paying fines or completing community service. 4. The individual is not under any legal obligation beyond the conviction itself. Unconditional discharge versus other sentencing options, approximately 400,500 words. To better understand the implications of an unconditional discharge, let's compare it to other common sentencing options. Conditional discharge. This is similar to an unconditional discharge but with one key difference: it comes with conditions. A defendant given a conditional discharge may be required to stay out of trouble for a specified period or comply with certain behaviors, like attending counseling sessions or performing community service. Probation. Probation is a more serious sentence where the defendant must comply with specific rules set by the court, such as regular check-ins with a probation officer or maintaining good behavior for a period of time. Unlike an unconditional discharge, probation often involves more supervision. Fines and restitution. Sometimes, instead of or in addition to a discharge, a defendant might be required to pay a fine or restitution to the victim. This form of punishment holds the individual financially accountable for their actions. Custodial sentence. For more serious offenses, the court may decide that a custodial sentence is necessary. This means the defendant will serve time in prison or another form of detention. Clearly, this is the opposite of an unconditional discharge, which imposes no confinement. Conclusion. Approximately 150,200 words. In conclusion, an unconditional discharge represents a relatively lenient legal sentence, offering no immediate punitive measures other than a conviction on the defendant's record. It's often granted for low-level offenses, first-time offenders, or in cases where the defendant has shown remorse or rehabilitative potential. However, it is essential to remember that an unconditional discharge still results in a criminal record, which can have long-term consequences. If you've learned something new about the concept of unconditional discharges and the way they are applied in the justice system, feel free to like this video, subscribe to AI Future Wire News, and leave a comment with your thoughts. We're dedicated to keeping you informed on the most important topics in the world of AI, law, and more. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for our next episode. This version includes your YouTube channel name, AI Future Wire News, throughout the article. Let me know if you'd like any further changes.